On the icy winter morning, a powerful businessman ordered a blind elderly woman and her guide dog to be tied up on the athletic track. The last obstacle to his real estate empire, a simple yellow house with blue windows. As Mrs. Carmen trembled from the cold, the arrogant man's cell phone rang. On the other end of the line, a voice that would change his destiny forever. He could never have imagined that his own daughter would witness his cruelty. Some souls have no price. If you like stories that touch the heart and transform lives, subscribe to the channel for more moving narratives that will change your way of seeing the world. And let's begin our journey. The biting wind of that Wednesday morning whipped Mrs. Carmen's face, while Bingo, her loyal golden retriever, tried to guide her through the familiar path to the park. At 78, blind for a decade, she maintained the sacred routine of walking every morning exactly at 6 o'clock. The dog sniffed the air, sensing something different that day that promised to change his owner's life forever. "Come on, Bingo, my boy," Carmen whispered, tightening the leash with fingers trembling from the cutting cold. At that very moment, on the other side of town, Robert Montenegro adjusted his Italian silk tie in the mirror of his office on the 20th floor. At 52, he controlled half the real estate developments in the coastal town of Golden Rock. His grey eyes, cold as the steel of his buildings, analyzed the documents on his desk. There was the photo of the last property needed to complete his ambitious project, a little yellow house with blue windows, stubbornly planted in the middle of what would be his luxury complex. "Mr. Montenegro," his assistant entered cautiously, "the men you hired are on their way." Robert nodded without taking his eyes off the papers. "Make sure they are discreet, and remind them, no physical violence, just psychological persuasion." Meanwhile, Sarah Montenegro, 17, tied her running shoes in her room. Rebellious by nature, the magnate's only daughter had developed the habit of running at dawn. It was her way of escaping the suffocating atmosphere of her home, where her father barely noticed her existence, always busy with his business. "Dad's never home anyway," she murmured to herself, checking her cell phone. Why would today be different? Mrs. Carmen followed her usual route, her steps firm despite her age. Bingo remained alert, his golden fur shining under the first rays of sun that were beginning to break the horizon. Suddenly the dog stopped abruptly, a low growl escaping his throat. "What is it, boy?" Carmen tightened the leash, feeling the tension in the animal's body. Two figures emerged from the shadows. Charlie and Miller, burly men hired by Montenegro, approached with calculated steps. Charlie, the older one, had scars that told stories he preferred to forget. Miller, younger and more impulsive, was already extending his hand. "Good morning, ma'am," said Charlie, his voice artificially courteous. "We need to talk about your house." Carmen straightened her shoulders, recognizing the threatening tone behind the false politeness. "I already told Mr. Montenegro my house is not for sale. My parents built that house. My husband died in those rooms. There is no money in the world." "You're not understanding," Miller interrupted, stepping forward. "We're not asking." Bingo growled louder, positioning himself protectively in front of his owner. He was a trained dog, docile by nature but fiercely loyal when he perceived a threat. "What do you want?" Carmen's voice trembled slightly. "Just to make sure you reconsider." Charlie pulled a rope from his pocket. "We're going to take a different walk today." Sarah ran along the park trail, her headphones isolating her from the world. Electronic music pulsed in her ears while her legs worked at the familiar rhythm. She knew every curve of that path, every tree, every bench. It was her sanctuary, the only place where she felt truly free. The track was in the most isolated part of the park, surrounded by ancient trees that created dense shadows even during the day. It was there that Sarah liked to finish her run, doing some sprints on the 400-meter circle before heading home. "Please," Carmen's voice echoed, laden with wounded dignity. "I'm just a blind old woman. What do you gain from this?" "Orders are orders," Miller replied while Charlie held Bingo, who was barking desperately. The dog struggled against the hands that held him, but the men were strong and determined. Working with grim efficiency, they tied Carmen to the track's finish post. The ropes were rough against her delicate skin, tightened enough to leave marks, but not cause permanent damage. Montenegro had been specific about that. Bingo was tied beside her, his collar fastened so he couldn't move more than a few inches. "The cold will make you think better," Charlie said, checking the knots one last time. "Your boss knows where to find you when you decide to be reasonable." The men's footsteps receded, leaving only the sound of the wind and Carmen's stifled sobs. Bingo whined softly, pressing his warm body against his owner's legs, trying to offer some comfort. "It's okay, my boy," Carmen whispered, tears freezing on her face. "God is with us, he always is." Sarah slowed her pace as she approached the track, the music still pulsing in her ears. Something seemed different that morning. Perhaps it was the peculiar light of dawn, or the unusual silence of the birds. She removed one of her headphones, letting the natural sounds of the park penetrate her consciousness. That's when she heard it. A low sound, almost imperceptible. Crying? Or was it the wind? Sarah completely turned off the music, her instincts on alert. Years of paternal neglect had sharpened her perception for signs of danger or need. As she rounded the last curve before the track, Sarah froze. The scene before her was surreal, almost impossible to process. An elderly woman, clearly blind by her dark glasses and the fallen cane beside her, was tied to the finish post. A golden retriever, also tied, was desperately trying to break free to help his owner. "My God," Sarah ran, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons than exercise. Ma'am, what happened?" Carmen raised her head in the direction of the young voice, hope blooming in her chest. "Please, help us. My dog, he's my guide." Sarah's hands trembled as she worked on the knots, indignation growing with each second. Who could be capable of such cruelty? Her fingers struggled against the tight ropes, urgency making her movements clumsy. "I'll get you out of here," she promised, finally managing to loosen the first knot. "Did you call the police? Do you have any relatives?" "No, I don't have anyone," Carmen replied, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Just me and Bingo." Sarah looked at the woman's wrinkled face, something familiar flickering in her memory. That voice. Where had she heard that voice before? As she loosened the last ties, her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it. Nothing was more important than helping that woman at that moment. Sarah's hands finally managed to loosen the last ropes tying Bingo. The dog immediately jumped on his owner, licking her face with desperation and relief. Sarah helped Carmen to stand, noticing how the woman was trembling violently, not just from the cold, but from the trauma of the experience. "We need to get out of here." Sarah took off her running jacket and put it over the elderly woman's shoulders. "I'll take you somewhere safe." Carmen held the young woman's arm with surprising strength. "My dear, your voice. It's so familiar." "What's your name?" "Sarah," she replied, still trying to process the scene. "Sarah Montenegro." The name made Carmen shiver. Montenegro. The same last name as the man who was trying to take her house. Could it be a coincidence? Or was this young woman involved in some way? Montenegro. Carmen couldn't hide the apprehension in her voice. Sarah noticed the change in tone. "Yes, why? Do you know my family?" There was something in the way the young woman said family, a subtle bitterness and emotional distance, that made Carmen hesitate. She tightened Bingo's leash, seeking comfort in the familiar contact. "Let's get out of the cold first," Sarah insisted, noticing the hesitation. "There's a coffee shop nearby. You need to warm up." As they walked slowly, Sarah turned on her cell phone's recording mode. Something told her she would need to document this. Years of observing her father's questionable business practices had taught her the importance of evidence. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I don't know your name." "Carmen," the voice came low. "Carmen Sterling." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but she stored the information. "Mrs. Sterling, who did this to you? Why would anyone do something so cruel?" Carmen hesitated. How to explain to the daughter of the man responsible? How to tell her that her father had ordered this barbarity? The conflict tore at her heart, but the truth had always been her guide. "My dear," she began carefully, "sometimes powerful people believe they can get what they want through fear." Sarah stopped abruptly. The words echoed something she had always known but never wanted to admit about her own father. Are you saying that—" Her voice trailed off. "Your house," Carmen continued. "They want my house, and since I refused to sell—" Understanding hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She knew her father's methods all too well. She had witnessed meetings where he discussed persuasion strategies with his lawyers. She never imagined he would go to such extremes. At the coffee shop, Sarah helped Carmen sit in a quiet corner. Bingo lay at his owner's feet, still alert. Sarah ordered hot chocolate and toast, anything to warm the woman up. While they waited, Sarah studied Carmen's face. There was something, a distant, fleeting memory. Where had she seen that face before? "Mrs. Sterling," she began hesitantly, "have you always lived here in Golden Rock?" "My whole life." Carmen warmed her hands on the steaming cup. "I worked 40 years as a nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital. I retired 15 years ago when my husband, Robert, passed away." St. Joseph's Hospital. The words hit Sarah like lightning. Buried memories began to emerge. Her mother, in the last months of her life, admitted to that same hospital. A kind nurse who sang softly while she cared for her, who held her hand when the pain was unbearable. "You took care of terminally ill patients." Sarah's voice trembled. Carmen tilted her head, a sad smile touching her lips. "It was my specialty. I believed no one should leave this world alone or in pain. My mother—" Sarah couldn't continue. Tears welled up without warning, years of repressed pain overflowing. "Eleanor Montenegro. She died 5 years ago." Carmen's face lit up with recognition and compassion. "Eleanor, yes, I remember. A beautiful woman, brave until the end. And you must have been about 12. Always by her side, holding her hand. You used to sing," Sarah sobbed. "When she was in terrible pain, you would sing that song. What was it?" "Amazing Grace." Carmen began to hum softly. It was her favorite. She said it reminded her of happier times. The two women sat in silence, united by shared memory. Sarah now remembered. The gentle hands that cared for her mother, the voice that brought comfort in the darkest moments. And this was the same woman whom her father— "I need to call someone," Sarah said abruptly, taking out her cell phone. But it wasn't her father she called. It was the police station. While Sarah spoke to the police, Carmen stroked Bingo, lost in thought. Life had curious ways of intertwining destinies. The daughter of the patient she had cared for with so much affection was now her saving angel. "They're coming," Sarah informed, putting away her cell phone. "I gave them the location of the track. I told them I have recorded evidence." "Sarah," Carmen reached out, finding the young woman's hand. "You don't have to get involved in this. Your father—" "My father needs to be stopped," Sarah interrupted firmly. "What he did today, it crossed every line. You took care of my mother when—" He was too busy to show up at the hospital. "It's the least I can do." Her cell phone rang. It was her father. Sarah looked at the screen, the name Dad flashing insistently. She rejected the call. "He'll find out it was me," she said more to herself. "Security cameras, park employees. It won't take long." "You don't have to confront him because of me," Carmen insisted. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied with conviction. "I spent years pretending not to see what he was doing, ignoring the suspicious business meetings, the questionable documents. My mother would be disgusted if she knew what he's become." 2 police. Cars arrived at the coffee shop. Detective Miller, a middle-aged man with a tired look but sharp eyes, entered accompanied by 2 officers. Sarah recognized him. He had investigated irregularities in her father's companies years ago without enough evidence. "I received your call, Miss Montenegro," he said, his eyebrow arching as he recognized her. "You said you have evidence of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment?" Sarah showed him the recordings on her phone. Carmen tied up, the deplorable state. She found her in, the woman's account of the men who approached her. The detective watched with growing indignation. "Mrs. Sterling," he turned to the elderly woman, "can you identify the men who did this?" "They mentioned following orders," Carmen replied carefully. "They talked about my house, about me being reasonable with a purchase offer." The detective took meticulous notes. "And you refused previous offers?" "Several times. My house is not for sale. It was built by my parents. It's where I raised my family." "But it seems no is not an acceptable answer for some people." Sarah observed the delicacy with which Carmen avoided directly mentioning her father. Even after everything, the woman maintained a dignity that the young woman found both admirable and frustrating. "Detective," Sarah interrupted, "I need to be clear. I believe my father, Robert Montenegro, is behind this. He has been pressuring residents in Mrs. Sterling's neighborhood for months to sell their properties." The silence that followed was heavy. The detective studied her carefully. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Montenegro." "I know," Sarah kept her gaze firm. "I also know you've been investigating his business practices for years. Maybe this will finally give you what you need." Sarah's phone vibrated for the 10th time in 5 minutes. This time she answered. "Where are you?" Robert Montenegro's voice cut through the line, cold and controlled. "Your running tracker shows you stopped at the park over an hour ago." Sarah took a deep breath. "I'm at the downtown coffee shop. Dad, we need to talk. Come home immediately. We have matters to discuss." "No." The word came out firm, surprising, even herself. "If you want to talk to me, you come here." The silence on the other end was eloquent. Robert Montenegro was not used to being contradicted, especially by his own daughter. "Sarah?" His tone changed, a veiled threat sliding beneath the polished surface. "Central coffee shop, corner table." She hung up before he could respond. Detective Miller observed the interaction with professional interest. "Your father will come." "He'll come," Sarah confirmed. "He hates losing control of any situation." While they waited, more details emerged. Carmen, encouraged by Sarah's supportive presence, began to recount the months of psychological pressure. Threatening letters disguised as generous offers. Men lurking around her house at odd hours. Neighbors being convinced to sell under suspicious circumstances. "Mrs. Peterson at number 47 sold after her cat disappeared," Carmen recounted, stroking Bingo. "The animal showed up dead a week later on her doorstep. She moved out the next day." Sarah felt her stomach churn. How could she have been so blind? Or worse, how had she chosen to be blind? The bell above the door tinkled. Robert Montenegro entered, his impeccable suit contrasting with the casual atmosphere of the coffee shop. His grey eyes swept the room, narrowing as he saw the detective. "Sarah," he said, ignoring everyone else. "Let's go." "Sit down, Dad." Sarah gestured to the empty chair. "I think you know Mrs. Carmen Sterling." Robert barely glanced at the elderly woman. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The woman your goons tied to the track this morning?" Sarah clarified, her voice sharp. "The same one who has been refusing your generous offers." "Be careful what you say, daughter." The warning was clear. "Mr. Montenegro," the detective intervened, "we are investigating a case of kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. Perhaps you'd like to cooperate." Robert turned to him with calculated disdain. "Detective Miller, still trying to build cases where none exist. I thought you'd learned your lesson last time." "Things change," Miller replied calmly, "especially when there are witnesses and evidence." Sarah placed her cell phone on the table, the recording ready. Before she could play it, Robert intercepted her. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was low, dangerous. "The right thing," Sarah responded, finding courage deep within. Something Mum would have done. The mention of Eleanor Montenegro changed something in Robert's expression. For a moment, a shadow of pain crossed his eyes before being quickly suppressed. "Your mother is dead," he said brutally. "Thank God," Carmen spoke for the first time since he arrived. "At least she didn't live to see what you've become." Robert finally looked at her, truly looked. Recognition took a few seconds to register. "You," he said slowly. "The nurse." "I held her hand when you were too busy to show up," Carmen continued, her voice soft but unyielding. "I sang to her when the pain was unbearable. I wiped her tears when she cried, asking where her husband was." Sarah watched the interaction, seeing her father falter for the first time in years. Carmen had touched his only vulnerability. "Eleanor." "This has nothing to do with," Robert began. "It has everything to do with it," Carmen interrupted. "Eleanor made me promise something before she left. She said, 'Take care of my Sarah if our paths cross. Robert will try to mold her in his image, but she has my heart. Don't let him destroy that.'" The words hit Sarah like a fist. Tears streamed. silently down her face. "Lies," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The truth," Carmen corrected, "and here we are. Your daughter saved me today from the cruelty you ordered. Eleanor would be proud." Robert's phone rang, he answered irritably. "What?" Sarah could vaguely hear the voice on the other end. Something about the press, leaks, the video she had anonymously posted before calling the police already going viral on social media. Robert's face turned pale. "How much?" The answer made him close his eyes. Sarah realized her father's empire was shaking. In minutes, the story had spread. The video of a blind, elderly woman tied up, the involvement of the powerful businessman, Montenegro, the daughter's courage in reporting her own father. "You did this," he said, staring at Sarah in disbelief. "You ruined everything." "You did this," she replied. "I just refused to keep covering it up." Detective Miller stood up. "Mr. Montenegro, I need you to come with me for questioning." "You don't have proof," Robert tried his usual bluff. "Charlie Miller," a voice came from the coffee shop entrance. Everyone turned to see one of the goons standing there, sweaty and clearly nervous. "He sent me here to—" The man stopped as he saw the scene. Robert, the detective, the victims. Understanding and fear crossed his face. "Go on," the detective encouraged. Charlie swallowed hard. "He sent me here to make sure the—" Old woman, that Mrs. Sterling didn't talk to anyone, but— He looked at Sarah, recognizing her from the viral videos. "But I think I'm too late." The spontaneous confession was the last straw. Robert Montenegro, the man who controlled half the city, saw his world collapse in a matter of minutes. "Dad," Sarah said softly, surprising herself with the sadness in her voice. "Why did it have to be like this? Mom left so much money, we have so much. Why do you always need more?" For a moment, Robert seemed truly lost. The powerful man, feared and respected, seemed to shrink before everyone's eyes. "It was for you," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Everything was always to secure your future." "My future?" Sarah shook her head. "You destroyed my present. You took away my father when you took away Mom's husband. And now I don't even have that anymore." Carmen extended her hand, finding Sarah's. "You have more than you think, child. You have your mother's courage, and deep down, you still have the chance to rescue the man your father once was." The detective signaled to his officers. Robert didn't resist when the handcuffs were placed. Before being led away, he looked at Sarah one last time. "The Swiss clinic," he said suddenly, "where your mother wanted to have the experimental treatment. I said it was too expensive, that it wasn't worth it. It was a lie. I just didn't want to admit I was losing her." The confession caught everyone by surprise. Sarah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. All these years believing that financial issues had prevented her mother's last treatment. "Go," Carmen squeezed Sarah's hand. "Forgive him. Not for him, but for you. And for Eleanor." As the police took Robert and Charlie away, Sarah remained seated, processing the morning's revelations. In a few hours, her life had been turned upside down. "What now?" she asked in a low voice. "Now," Carmen smiled, that same warm smile that had comforted her mother years ago. "You have a choice. Let this destroy you or use it to build something better." Bingo, as if understanding the moment, rested his head on Sarah's lap. For the first time in years, she felt less alone. The following weeks after the incident passed like a tornado in Sarah's life. The media had turned the story into a national phenomenon. The heiress who reported her own father plastered magazine covers. But for Sarah, each day was a battle between right and the emotional weight of her choices. That rainy afternoon, she was sitting in the law office, surrounded by documents. The voice of Mr. Henry Peterson, the family lawyer for 3 decades, echoed through the room. "Your father froze most of the assets before the arrest," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "But there's an educational account in your name and some investments he couldn't touch." Sarah barely listened. Her mind wandered to Carmen, who had become a constant presence in her life. The elderly woman had insisted that Sarah stay with her just until things calmed down. 2 weeks later, The young woman was still sleeping in the guest room of the little yellow house. "How much is left?" Sarah asked directly. "Enough for college and a modest start," Peterson replied. "But Sarah, there's another matter." The lawyer pulled out a yellowed envelope. "This was in your father's private safe, addressed to you with instructions to deliver only in case of extreme circumstances." Sarah recognized her mother's handwriting. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. "I'll leave you alone," Peterson said gently, leaving the room. "My dearest Sarah," the letter began. "If you are reading this, something has happened that has drastically changed your life. Knowing your father as I do, I imagine it has to do with his excessive ambition." Sarah had to stop, tears blurring her vision. "I want you to know that the man you may be facing now is not the man I fell in love with. Robert was once kind, a dreamer, full of plans to make the world a better place. Power and money changed him, but I believe that deep down that man still exists. If our paths have crossed with Carmen Sterling, as I sense they will, trust her. She was my angel in my final moments. I promised her that, if something happened, part of my personal assets would go to a noble cause. At the bottom of my jewelry box, there are documents for a property in the countryside. I always dreamed of turning it into a home for abandoned seniors." Sarah stopped reading, remembering her mother's jewelry box untouched since her death. "Finally, my love, remember, true inheritance is not what we leave in possessions, but in acts of kindness. Your father may have forgotten this, but you have the chance to remind him, with eternal love, Mum." The door opened softly. Carmen entered, Bingo by her side. "The driver told me you were here," she explained. "Are you okay?" Sarah handed the letter to Carmen to read aloud. When she finished, both were crying. "Eleanor was always special," Carmen murmured, "even at the end, thinking of others." "The property she mentions," Sarah said suddenly. "I know where it is. We used to go there when I was a child. There's a big house, barns, lots of space." "Sarah," Carmen began, but the young woman interrupted her. "Let's do this. Let's create the home Mum dreamed of. For seniors like you who have been threatened, abandoned, forgotten." Carmen smiled, that smile Sarah had come to love. "It's a beautiful project, but—" "No buts. You have medical experience. I have energy and some resources. We can get support, volunteers." Sarah's excitement was contagious. For the first time since her father's arrest, she felt a clear purpose. That night, around the dinner table in the yellow house, they began to plan. Sarah discovered that Carmen had an impressive network of contacts: retired nurses, doctors, social workers. "Dr. Adams always talked about volunteering after retiring," Carmen mentioned, making notes in Braille. "And Mr. Evans, the physical therapist, lost his wife last year. He's been lost, he needs a new purpose." Sarah documented everything on her laptop, creating spreadsheets, budgets, strategies. With each idea, the project came to life. "What will we call it?" Carmen asked during a tea break. Sarah didn't hesitate. "Eleanor House in her memory, but it also means light. That's what Mom always was." Sarah's phone vibrated. It was a message from her father's lawyer. "Robert wants to see you. He's willing to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a visit from you." Sarah showed the message to Carmen. The elderly woman held her hand. "It's your decision," she said softly. "But remember what your mother wrote. Sometimes forgiveness is the first step to redemption." 2 days later, Sarah was sitting in front of the protective glass at the detention center. When Robert appeared, she barely recognized him. The powerful man had aged years in weeks. "Sarah," he said, sitting down heavily. "Dad." Silence stretched, between them heavy with unsaid words. "I heard about the project," he finally spoke. "Eleanor House." Sarah was surprised. "How?" "Peterson told me. Said you're using the countryside property." A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "Your mother loved that place. She wanted to turn it into something good. She always wanted that, to turn things into something good." Robert lowered his eyes. "I used to be like that too." "I know," Sarah said softly. "Mom told me." They talked for an hour, not about the crime or the trial, but about Eleanor, about memories buried under years of ambition. Robert told stories Sarah had never heard. How he met Eleanor at a craft fair, how she convinced him to use part of his first big sale to build a playground in the poor neighborhood. "I want to help," he said at the end, "with Eleanor House. There's money in accounts I can still legally access. I want it to go towards that." Sarah studied her father. "Why?" "Because," Robert swallowed hard, "it's what Eleanor would want. And because maybe it's my chance to be the man she loved again." In the following weeks, things accelerated. The story of Sarah and Carmem had touched many hearts. Donations began pouring in, small amounts from retirees, large checks from sympathetic businessmen. The countryside property underwent renovations. Sarah discovered talents she didn't know she had: organization, leadership, the ability to inspire others. Carmem, meanwhile, proved to be a natural mentor, training volunteers with infinite patience. "Caring for seniors isn't just about medication and meals," she explained during a training session. "It's about dignity, respect, love. Many have been abandoned by families, mistreated by systems. Our job is to restore their faith in humanity." Bingo became the unofficial mascot of the project, receiving special training to become a therapy dog. One sunny afternoon, while supervising the painting of the rooms, Carmem made a revelation. "My vision is getting worse," she said casually. "The doctor said it's progressive. In a few months I'll likely lose the ability to distinguish light and shadow completely." Sarah stopped, the brush in the air. "Mrs. Sterling..." "Shh." The elderly woman calmed her. "It's not sadness I feel, it's gratitude. I got to see this day. I saw you become the woman your mother dreamed of. I saw evil turn into good. What more could I ask for?" They stood embracing, watching the activity of the party. Children ran through the garden, grandchildren of the residents, volunteers served food. Laughter echoed through the property. "Do you know what else makes me happy?" Carmem continued. "That when the complete darkness comes, the last images I'll take with me will be these: love, hope, redemption." Bingo approached, sitting at his owner's feet. The dog seemed to understand that he would soon be needed even more. "Promise me one thing?" Carmem asked. "Anything. Keep going, even when I can no longer actively help. Keep expanding, welcoming, loving. Promise?" "I promise," Sarah said firmly. "Eleanor House will be your legacy as much as Mom's." As evening fell, when the last guests were leaving, Sarah found a moment of peace. Sitting on the porch of the main house, she watched the sunset paint the sky golden. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "Ms. Montenegro, I represent a group of international investors interested in replicating the Eleanor House model in other cities. Can we talk?" Sarah smiled. The dream was just beginning. 3 months after the inauguration of Eleanor House, the autumn mornings began to color the trees golden. Sarah had established a routine. She woke up at sunrise, worked a few hours in her office on the property, then spent the rest of the day interacting with the residents. That morning, Sarah found Carmem sitting on her favorite bench in the garden, her hands resting in her lap. Bingo lay at her feet, attentive as always. "Sarah?" Carmem interrupted her narration, sensing the familiar presence. "How did you know it was me?" Sarah approached, always impressed by her mentor's sharp perception. Carmem smiled. "Your perfume and the sound of your footsteps. Each person has a unique signature in the world." Sarah gently dismissed the young volunteer who was transcribing Carmem's memories and sat beside her. "I have news," she announced, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice. "The committee approved. We're opening the first Eleanor House branch in the Northeast within 6 months." Carmem squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "Your mother would be so proud." "There's more," Sarah continued. "Dad will be released on parole next month." The judge considered his exemplary behavior and the contributions he's made even from detention. A significant silence followed the revelation. "And how do you feel about that?" Carmem asked finally. Sarah took a deep breath. Scared, hopeful, confused, all the possible feelings at the same time. "True forgiveness isn't pretending that evil never happened," Carmem said softly. "It's choosing to move forward, despite what happened. You've shown a strength that few possess, my dear." Sarah felt warm tears streaming down her face. "All this started with you, Mrs. Sterling. If you hadn't been at the park that morning, if I hadn't been at the park that morning, God would have found another way, Carmen interrupted gently. We don't write our own history, we just choose how to react to the chapters we are given. Spring arrived, bringing renewal. On the day Robert Montenegro left the detention center, no press was waiting. Just a simple car where Sarah waited behind the wheel. The drive to Eleanor House was made in contemplative silence. Robert watched the landscape changing from city to country as a metaphor for his own transformation. I prepared the old barn. Sarah finally broke the silence. We turned it into a small house. I thought you'd like to have your own space while you readjust. Robert turned to her, eyes welling up. You didn't have to do that. I know, Sarah replied simply. I chose to. When they arrived at the property, a small welcome committee was waiting. Mr. Augustus Montenegro, some staff, and in the center, Carmen, impeccably dressed, Bingo by her side. Robert got out of the car slowly, as if testing the ground of his new reality. He approached Carmen with hesitant steps. Mrs. Sterling, his voice was hoarse with emotion, I don't deserve to be here. Carmen extended her hand, meeting his with impressive precision. None of us deserve the second chances we receive, Mr. Montenegro. That's why they're called grace. That night, during dinner in the main house, Augustus stood up with a glass in his hand. The patriarch of the Montenegros looked around the table, at his son who had fallen and risen again, at his granddaughter who had discovered a strength he never knew she possessed, at Carmen, whose physical darkness harbored an inextinguishable inner light. To Eleanor House, he proposed the toast, where the broken find healing and the lost find purpose. To Eleanor House, everyone replied in unison. Later, Sarah found Carmen in the aromatic herb garden, where the elderly woman used to spend, her evenings smelling the perfumes intensified by the dew. Do you know what I'm thinking? Carmen asked, sensing Sarah approach. What? That sometimes we need to be tied up to discover our true freedom. Carmen smiled, that smile that had become the beacon of Eleanor House. That morning in the park, it was the worst and best day of my life. Sarah sat beside her, watching the stars that Carmen could no longer see, but somehow seemed to feel more deeply than anyone else. What do you think happens now? Sarah asked. Not just about Eleanor House, but about all the lives intertwined by that fateful event. Carmen turned her face to the starry sky. Now we continue our journey. Your father finds redemption through service. You discover new potentials you didn't even know you had. The residents receive the care they always deserved. And you? Sarah asked softly. Me? Carmen smiled. I do what I've always done. Find light even in darkness, and show the way to others who are lost. A shooting star streaked across the sky, invisible to Carmen but somehow felt. The elderly woman squeezed Sarah's hand. When I received the diagnosis of progressive vision loss 15 years ago, I thought it would be the end of my useful life. How could a nurse help someone without seeing? Now I see, forgive the pun, that it was just the beginning of a new mission. Sarah laughed softly at the unexpected humor. You never cease to surprise me. That's life, my dear. Surprises, twists,